world of the nanotechnology, so I'm not even cutting close. So everything small is going to be nanotechnology, and this is the technology which now is more and more sort of imprinting on our life, and there's a lot of promises and danger related to that. So just to remind you, this conference is organized by me and Linda, my partner in crime. I work at the Department of Anesthesiology in Mayo Clinic. I'm also president of the SHCI. Linda works at the University of California, Santa Cruz. She's also founding director of the Caveat at Crown College. And Caveat has this incredible take on the ethical aspects of the innovation. And when first time I met Linda, I was not sure whether that will work, but now I think her wisdom was much better than mine and foresight. So this is organized by two organizations, Society of Healthcare Innovation and Crown College. Society for Healthcare Innovation is, we were founded in 2020. And our goal is to propagate or enable the innovation for people, especially with the underprivileged strata of our society. We believe that the innovation is not elitist, but is more egalitarian, and that's one our goal. Crown College is part of University of California at Santa Cruz, and focus on the social sciences, and is also the host for the Caveat when Linda and Lisa are the leaders. Today, the way the presentation will go, we have a very simple format. We are going through the introduction, then there will be a presentation. Just to remind you, the way we organize those presentation is by streaming them on the LinkedIn or the YouTube. Today we have a live YouTube link. So there are some people who are also invited, or they went through the link, but most of the show is happening outside the Zoom. At the end, we have a moderator Q&A, and that's when me, Linda, Lisa, and our guest will also chime in. How to make this work? We all do the Zoom since the COVID quite extensively. So just make sure that your audio is adjusted, whether you're muted or not muted. Make sure that there's no too many visual distraction behind you, or you have a screen. We used to have a breakout rooms. We're not planning this today, but the very important thing, all of this is going to be recorded, is going to put on the internet, so it will never ever disappear from your life. So just be cognizant of that fact. So moving forward, again, we have today Linda, we also have Lisa at Berkeley. She participated in this conference, I believe, over the last 2 years, if not longer. So she's one of our, great supporter. Her experience is mostly focused on the resilience, well-being, and ethical leadership. All of those aspects are now kind of one of the hot topics. We do talk about the resilience. We talk about how ethical approaches kind of should grant a lot of things that you work. She works as director of resilience and well-being at the University of California. She's also one of the co-founder of the Caveat. So she's going to be one of our contact experts, and she will keep me and Linda honest, so we don't speak up a little bit out as a technocrats. Me like a technocrats, Linda like a person in between. So saying all of the above, I'm going to let Linda present, and Linda, it's your floor right now.
Thank you. And I just want to say thank you to Lisa and our other attendants here. We'll make sure that the recordings are uploaded later today for everybody. So today we're going to talk. I'm going to go ahead and start sharing my screen. Let's see. I'll put this into a slideshow there. And this particular topic I thought was interesting because it overlaps with so much of the other work that we do at Caveat. One of the things that both Lisa and I have been working on is the concept of data dignity. And data dignity is to put it briefly, is uh, to make sure that patients have choices about how their information is being used. And it's also to help provide access to patients. One of the biggest issues, one of the biggest ethical issues we face in healthcare in general is making sure that patients have access, that there is equity. So some of this might actually sound a little bit like science fiction, but this is a field I've been studying for a long time. I wrote an article about it in 2012. And actually, this was a great opportunity to sort of update the article and talk about what were some of the issues that have come up. Now, this yesterday we had Dr. James Giordano talking about neurotechnology, brain implants, um, but also about general technologies. For example, things that we are doing at the nanoscale. One of the things that he mentioned with the advent of AI, nanotechnology, and genetic engineering is that we might be able, say, for example, to cure or at least find a way to treat Huntington's chorea, which is a neurodegenerative disease. So, uh, for today, what we're going to do is this is really just an overview of many of the uh, technologies that have just come out over the last 10 to 15 years and the challenges that we face, and the same challenges that we face in other areas too. So, the one of the things we want to do is make sure that innovation is not just for the sake of innovation, but it's to protect humanity, it's to protect our human dignity and uh, provide justice. So, a little bit of background information. It's a $15 billion global market. And there are more than 50 FDA uh, approved nano formulations. Now, to me, this is interesting because under the FDA, you can either, if you create a nanomedicine, a nano delivery system, it can be classified as either a drug or a device. And there's different standards for that. So I'm not going to get into too much detail about that, but if we wanted to do a deep dive, well, that would be appropriate for another time. But here are some of the examples that you may not realize uh, are being used for nanotechnology. Uh, the mRNA vaccines, the COVID vaccines. So let me give you a case example. Sarah used these the mRNA vaccines, got her COVID vaccine, and which used lipid nanoparticles. But her neighbor in the rural area couldn't get the vaccine for months. Same technology, but different access. So the question is, how do we balance? We can have rapid deployment, but how do we make sure everybody has access to it? And one of the bigger issues that we're facing is targeted cancer therapies. Well, it's great that we have them. Patients are benefiting from them, but sometimes you have to fight just to get your insurance covered. There, a lot of these technologies are priced beyond people's reach, and depending on the kind of insurance you have, um, it certainly can be a challenge. We're also one of the areas that uh, is worthy of consideration is neural interfaces. A lot of you may have heard about Elon Musk's Neuralink, and I can tell you the military has been working on neural interfaces, and we can, the promise in nanoneural technology is that we can restore function that has been lost, say in Alzheimer's patients. But the other concern is, well, what if we use it for enhancement techniques? Well, who gets it then? Is it just those who can afford it? Some of the other ethical issues are pluripotent stem cell therapies. Where do we to is the use of embryos appropriate for this? This continues to remain an ethical debate. And some other things that are pretty amazing are smart wound dressings, in which the nanoparticles can help with patient healing of wounds. But on the other hand, the cost can be pretty outrageous. So this is this is one of the bigger issues. One of the things is that with the clinical trials, we've been able to have nanomedicine nanoparticles that can sense local tissue conditions and can help adapt drug release. And this one blows my mind. Modulate immune response for healing. If you have an autoimmune disorder and the body starts attacking itself, then these nanoparticles give the opportunity to tamper the immune response. And the clinical data has shown that there's a threefold improvement in regeneration rates. One of the fascinating things about just healthcare in general and the advances is that in the past, what healthcare professionals did was basically just help the body heal itself. Remove the offending agent, let the body heal itself. But we're actually beginning to reach a point with technology where we can actually use the technology to enhance, speed up healing. So this is different than how medicine and healthcare has been practiced in the past. So a lot of these issues are the same that you would find in any healthcare, in healthcare ethics generally. I mean, one of the issues is informed consent. A lot of these are still relatively new. And informed consent is an issue that we have. Well, it changes because the technology keeps changing. Informed consent in the past has just been considered, here, take a look at this document, sign here, you're giving us permission to treat. But the problem with that is that it needs to be an ongoing dialogue. It needs to be an ongoing conversation. One of the best examples I can think of right now is something that Lisa and I have been working on, which is the 23andMe data that was in the bankruptcy case. What happened was when people signed up to get their genome, their genetic mapping, so to speak, with 23andMe, they signed a consent form but they never expected that 23andMe would end up selling their genetic data. So that was not a successful informed consent, and it was not necessarily an ongoing conversation with the patients. We also get into the big question of, is healthcare a basic human right? And this is a debate or a discussion that will continue to go on. Is it a basic human right, or is it a privilege? Is it something that only those who can afford should be able to access? Also, as I mentioned earlier, the issue of stem cell ethics, where do we get our stem cells from? Plus, some of the other biomedical ethical issues include transparency and experimental um, in clinical experiments. No, this is something that is a way of introducing nanomedicine that I think people would find somewhat palatable if they know that it's going to help them. On top of that, the issues of commercialization of this technology. So, as our current healthcare system stands, I attended. Listen, I was attending a meeting where somebody was saying, "Well, if you're going to do something, you have to make sure it makes a profit." And I'm thinking to myself, how is that in our healthcare system, the only thing that can be that will move forward is if it makes a profit, if it makes somebody uh, wealthy. It seems there's some problems. It's a perverse incentive to a large extent. Also, one of the bigger issues is global collaboration. Um, we still continue to hammer out how to measure nanoparticles, what standards to use. Um, Global collaboration is still certainly um, in ongoing. Some of the ways that the things that can the nanotechnology can help is with continuous data generation. And this brings us back to the question of yeah, who owns that data? And in a more theoretical aspect, um, not only does who owns that data, but is that data uh, part of your personhood? So um, we're in the middle of updating this paper, and even though this is an exciting new technology, there's a hefty price tag for it. Insurance covers sometimes less than 10% of it, and average therapy cost is way outside the cost of the average people. So it's not only regenerative medicine, but healthcare in general. So um, we want cures, but at what cost to everybody? So uh, under the FDA that regulates things, there's different standards for whether or not something is cosmetic or something is for curative purposes. There's different standards. So we can use nanotechnology. It's funny, if you can have nanotechnology in your toothpaste, and the FDA, because it's for cosmetic purposes, the FDA is not going to worry about it. But if it is for medical treatment, the standards um, become a lot tougher. This article by Leon, another ethicist, echoes something that we've been talking about for a long time, which is that we don't want financial interests to overshadow patient welfare. So which comes first, the money or the patients? Well, it's uh, it seems to me it doesn't have any good. It's not any good to have somebody making a profit if we're not helping each other. So we need also we need to move forward in terms of setting minimum safety, patient advocates. One of the things that we're doing through data dignity with consulinet.com with Elizabeth Dreiser is looking at these different pillars. And this is not just for regenerative nanomedicine, this is for pretty much any sort of healthcare. We want to make sure that the process is transparent. We need to be able to consult patients, that patients have a say in this, and that it is designed in an equitable manner. Um, One of the wonderful things about this is continuous learning too. As a professor, I learn from my students learn from me, we learn from each other. Um, because uh, because this has become one of the newer standards. We need to think about adaptive governance, but also environmental responsibility. One of the downsides of the use of certain nanoparticles is it can get into the water, into the waste streams, and we don't always know what impact it's going to have on our environment, and shifts then the focus to public health as opposed to individual health. Most people I know don't really they hear the term nano and they think about something that's very tiny, but I'm not sure that but there's different tiny shapes. There's spherical, there's arrow-like. Um, it's something that's important to educate the public about. And for some people, it's very frightening. When I was in another country a few years ago, um, I saw in the grocery store there was a dry powdered milk with nano calcium particles in it. And I thought that was fascinating. As something of a science geek, I thought that was great. I brought a package home and showed it to some of my colleagues who were like, "Oh my gosh, people are going to freak out over this." That it was a reaction similar to those who are adamantly anti-GMO. And for some reason, I guess new things scare people. So the important point that I'm making is that it's not one and done. It's not something that we just drop onto the public. It's something that needs to be a continuous process. It's something that we need to talk about in society so that we have an informed society. So, what are we working on? How are we going to do this? Well, one of the things Lisa and Data Dignity and the Society for Healthcare Innovation is advocating is launching patient advocacy advisory boards, implementing transparent pricing, dynamic consent, community education programs, ethics training for all the staff, and longer term, universal access program. And how do we make sure that this is something that serves all of us, not just a few? And from the research that we've done with Data Dignity and other patients, these are some of the questions that patients are bringing up. why does my zip code determine my access to treatment? Who decides when smart medicine changes my therapy? I want to understand what's happening in my body. We need seats at the decision-making table. So, in general, we need to be working holistically together in a system. It's not, we want to make sure that it's not just STEM, but all voices are included. It needs to be an interdisciplinary uh, convergence. So, and that would include things like making sure the language is clear and making sure treatments are available regardless, and safeguards against exploitations. So, some of the questions that we're left with are how do we ensure in true informed consent for therapies that may have to adapt because there is AI integrated into them? What is one of my favorite questions, what do we owe each other? What's our ethical obligation to provide access? Um, is there a distinction that needs to be made between therapy and enhancement? For example, uh, is it if, if you give somebody growth hormone, okay, is that enhancement or is that therapy? Um, I heard somebody say, oh, ethics just slows things down. Well, I would say that it doesn't slow things down, but it does put guardrails on research. And it'd be good it would be a wonderful idea to involve patients and get their say on the commercialization aspect so that it is not necessarily just focused. Profits, rewards are not necessarily focused on just a few. How do we make this distributive? So, and also in general, to recognize that healthcare and healing is a human right. So I've posted a few sites here for people who are interested and some of the references in putting this together. So, the idea is to build a future where breakthrough science serves as breakthrough equity. And I'll be happy to share a copy of the slides and answer any questions.
Maybe I start because I like a couple notes over there. I think that 23andMe is a very good example of the consent and the troubles. And sharing something personal at some point, I was like, well, maybe I should get a GWAS, which means the full sequencing. The interesting part, which was surprising for me, was that all the companies that I researched, both in US and in Europe, requires you to co-consent for 5 days of the sharing of your data for the research purposes. They're anonymized and everything, but I always felt like, okay, so I pay for the service and I pay pretty hefty price, but then I'm being asked to sort of share my code, anonymous or not, for 5 years when I have absolutely no control over this. And being a researcher, I do know that if I share the data from my study with one of my collaborators, yeah, technically I can recall this data, but practically it's very, very difficult. So I think, this goes to this idea that one, unless I specifically look for this particular clause about how long my data or if my data was shared, I would not know. I would just sign 14-page consent, which is far from informed. I think, if you can read one page, that I would call the informed consent. Okay, 14 pages, that doesn't make sense. But, those consents, for the lack of the better word, are in fact fake. Because once the data release, and, you mentioned the ongoing dialogue. I think one of my questions would that ongoing dialogue would be critical. And, for example, when I do my study at Mayo Clinic, we follow the patients for a year and we talk to them, and now we're talking to them, can we extend the follow-up for another like 2 or 3 years? So we have this conversation, but we have a small group of people, and obviously we take no as an answer very, very well, but that's not the practice. And I think a question is how to build this in, because me sort of being on both sides of the at the aisle, I'm like, well, I don't want to get my GWAS and then lose my data, because God knows what will happen. Actually, that's one reason I haven't done it. Okay, but what surprised me was, so that's number one. How do you actually improve that process? How do you tag your data that you can always pull them whatever they are? And the second question, what surprised me, we're talking about the profit, all those kind of things. Again, I have a little bit naive approach that, this is how the US healthcare system is driven. The European system may have a different sort of drivers, but the consents were strikingly identical. So, it's sort of for me like, okay, so next time I go to the hospital and somebody did the blood test on me, they can do whatever they want, however they want to do it. So I'm kind of curious about your comments, how this can be done the way that, whatever this motives which makes this consent work for the person who does my test, make the way that actually works for me. Because when I read those consent, this is not working for me. This is just release of my stuff and have a nice day. So I'm like, okay. So I'm curious, what would be the ideal word, and how we create this incentive that actually this ethical, or I think common sense principle do apply.
Right, right.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Go ahead. Oh, Linda, were you gonna?
Oh no, I was just going to say, I forgot. There was something I'd read recently that if people
choose to opt in rather than opt out, that's number one. I think too, also here in the US, one of the things that we're working hard on is the don't sell my data, do not sell my data bill, don't sell my DNA bill that we're working on to try and hopefully get in Congress. And it's related but it's specifically to bankruptcy court. And while that's not the ideal framework to be discussing this, certainly that what 23andMe has showed us is that that's the place that we have to start, because as of the 23andMe, with the sale of all of that biodata, keep in mind the 23andMe is 18 between so they said they have 18 million accounts. So that means that 18 million people have donated somewhere, but then many people chose to opt out. So they now make reference to 15 million customers. So that means right there alone, you've got 3 million people whose data has basically been orphaned, because you can't get rid of it, you can't delete it. And so there are very, very serious ramifications on this, and we are really working hard to try to resolve this, and also working with legislatures here in the US to try to change this, because the long-term ramifications of this are actually quite terrifying. When we talk about science fiction becoming our reality, we're in a Gattaca moment potentially. And so, yeah, go ahead.
I'm interested if, when I think about this, and the other thing which sort of surprised me, and again, it's for me kind of funny because I do clinical trial, I do my own research as a PI. And as you said, for example, Minnesota has a compact that unless you opt out, all our data are our data. Like you have to literally opt it out as the default. I understand that may work for the, organ donation, but not sure about the data, especially that you don't know where this data go into. But in the terms of the orphan data, it's for me fascinating that this data gets stuck in the limbo, and the whole idea of cell is also kind of when I think about it, I literally, the first question I was like, why this cannot be made public? Like at least, all of us can sort of benefit versus few selected people. You know, if that would be one of the options to go around it. Because as of now, whoever has the most money, which is the pharma, will take the money, and then they will ask us, okay, then pay for all this discovery. So it's like you get hit twice.
So that's a lot of what Global Biodata Trust is focusing on, is trying to create a public database, if you will, or public accessibility to it, where people not only opt in, but it's basically trying to create a marketplace for the use of your data, where you can actually also get paid. So I think you're thinking in the right direction with this. Linda, were you going to say something?
No, I was just, well, I had forgotten to mention global bio. Oops, I think I put it. It's go ahead. Global bio.
It's the Global Biodata Trust, and are you sure? I'm not sure if that's the correct website. Hold on one second.
Okay, yeah, I'm not sure if it is the correct
website.
It is. I think
it's globalbiodatatrust.org, and
I spelled it wrong then. Global bio
GLBALBIO
data.
Oh yeah, I got it. I got it.
Okay. Can somebody put it into the chat so that we can share it?
And actually, what I can do, and is it worth it for me to jump down this rabbit hole here and share the screen so you see?
Yeah,
we like the rabbit holes. Rabbit holes are
one thing before, it's just I think important to point out that genetic data is not like any other information. It's not like your credit card information. It's immutable. It's something that cannot be changed. You can't change your DNA. It's sort of a permanent marker. So with that in mind, yes, please do.
Yeah, it's and it's a permanent marker, as well as the it can't be changed. It's a permanent marker, and what you can do with it once somebody gets a hold of it is really quite terrifying. I mean, we had a conversation. So some of us were actually on the ground for the 23andMe bankruptcy hearings in St. Louis. And one of the things that came up was, okay, so let's say somebody gets a hold of your biodata, some piece of your genetic material, and then they go clone somebody, and then we're not that far away from cloning. We know that, as much as we don't like to admit it, right? And so that person who's been cloned comes back to you, let's say, and says, hey, I'm your long lost child, and I'm entitled to part of your estate. I get to have part of your home when you die, right? And then they say, well, no, I don't have another kid, right? But then you say, prove it, and the genetics match up. And so the kind of mischief and skullduggery that can occur down the road from this kind of information being out in the world is actually quite terrifying. And there's some people, one of the judges, when we talked about it, was like, don't tell us science fiction, tell us reality. But this is potential reality in the next, really, possibly 5 to 10 years.
Yeah, I think the people sort of miss the imagination, how quickly these things move. And what I tell the people usually, I'm like, look at the SpaceX. 2010, it was obscure company, and the guy was begging NASA for money. Right now, he put the money out of pretty much competition. That take only 15 years to change everything. The interesting part, this, as you said, the science fiction is enormous. I can imagine that somebody contact me and say like, oh, by the way, you have this gene, would you like to do something about it? And, suddenly I'm like working with the diagnosis, but there was a question about, what ethics can do and what are the guardrails are. I think ethics sort of provides like a stop moment when you can like think about it. Because I'm hearing a lot of let's develop this, and that, and there's this question of the unintended consequences and the stuff that we haven't fought for, and suddenly it's right there.
That's right.
And I think we're looking at the AI. That's one of the perfect example. We talk about the nanotechnology today. Linda didn't touch, but how do you get rid of the nanotechnology particles? Are those going to be a forever particles that we don't know what to do? And there's all this kind of discussion. So,
And then there's the additional, like, what are the ramifications, to Linda's point earlier, is the equity piece is, once you have hold of people's DNA, what's the healthcare going to look like? How is the insurance going to impact you or not impact you? Who would you potentially get hired if your genetic material shows that you have a higher percentage chance of some kind of illness? It's really an interesting piece here. Yeah.
The positive aspect, the nice aspect is that having this could lead to personalized medicine. There is so much we still don't know about why diseases, why certain things happen, why, for example, some small part of the population develops, say, kidney failure as a result of use of NSAIDs. It's like 1 to 3% of the population, but we don't know why. We don't know the genetic package. We don't know, we can't predict it. So that's the promise of this.
But I think the problem is, how you make it equal, because, and this is kind of, and again goes this, example that I like, Euro versus USA, right? In 1995, there was a study comparing two modes of treatment for some condition called the atrial fibrillation. One was pacemaker, the other one was a drug, which is well-established drug even in 1995. And the results on both sides were identical. Conclusions were dramatically different. The US side recommended pacemaker versus European recommend amiodarone. So what they did something like Reagan and Gorbachev. They met in Reykjavik and they're like, okay, let's talk about it, why we reached a different conclusion. And at the end of the day, even in 95, the conclusion was that, yeah, pacemaker is sort of like slightly better, but it's more expensive. So US are like, we are happy to use that technology versus, like, using amiodarone, which is a drug that I mentioned, we can treat many more people. Right now there is something happening in the US healthcare, like we're talking about the Merck dropping the prices, some other kind of changes, whether we like it or not, people shake the tree very, very hard. And I think that's maybe for some thinking, but if somebody is born with the, I don't know, gene for the congestive heart failure, should we fix it when they're young, and who will pay for this? Okay, but that's a huge upfront expense that probably the person cannot afford. If most of us probably won't. The genomic therapy for some of the therapies that I've heard, like by AstraZeneca, is $457,000. That's astronomical sum of money. Okay, so probably not the therapy costs $100,000. We pay a lot of money into sort of bonus to the company. But the question, okay, so how is it going, like, do we need to have universal insurance? Do we have to have a completely different system? Because then you have a Europe, which a lot of people can't get a healthcare. Okay, even though everybody
they can or cannot in
cannot. So I literally have right now, I'm dealing with somebody who has a inherited ocular disease illness, and the person is slowly losing the eyesight. And yeah, there's a single gene mutation, and literally there's nothing in the Europe close. So when we went to the clinicaltrials.gov to look where are the treatment for that, or what the trial, 80% are them are United States, 15% are in Asia, 5%, and one was in Europe. So it's interesting when you look at this and how maybe neither model is good. How to cause, or maybe this thing should be so cheap that everybody could buy it as a cosmetics. I don't know.
Well, putting the idea of putting patients first rather than profit, I think, would be sort of a key way to approach it, because it's not as if humans, we don't live individually in a vacuum. What's good, if by keeping a healthy population, it's good for everyone. It helps productivity. It makes people happier. It's just like, but the bugaboo is in, like, okay, how are the rewards going to be distributed? do we think about profit caps? Maybe. Um, that gets into sort of a bit of a different area, like, oh my gosh, should we even have billionaires? Um, and in my mind, it helps to have the analogy of thinking of the earth as a holistic system, similar to our bodies. And if you have one organ that is trying to dominate or not working, it has a systemic impact. You cannot treat just a few, just you cannot just specify this particular area. You need to look at the body as a whole. Um, and I think in terms of healthcare, if we look at humanity as a whole, it's hard for me to think of an ethical justification to say, you know what, me first, forget the rest of you, or just have a few people benefit. We're not looking at the entire system. Does this make sense?
Well, I think it makes sense. The question is how to, the bottom line is, how you induce the people who make those huge profit to let it go. I think that's the million-dollar question. And, I can more, I hate to make this argument because, the pharma company are saying like, without these profits, we cannot do the research.
Well,
And
yeah,
I'm
that's
like, okay,
questionable.
there is like, some true and not true about it. But then you also have the people like Elon Musk, who seems to be doing all these crazy things with the money, which truly changed the world. So I actually want to hear about his, package from the whatever. I think this again went for some kind of court legal thing, how much money he got from Tesla for running the Tesla. And I'm like, well, at least he will build a colony on the Mars, okay, instead of spending on the 20 yachts, right? But I think there's still this like, I look at the sum of the money, I'm like, I can't even count the zeros. So
Yeah.
what do you do with that? It's a million-dollar question.
But I think it's an issue of really restructuring how things work.
Yeah.
I think that if governments were collectively, right now the US is one of the largest governments that contributes to most of the research. We pay for it.
Mhm.
So what if those funds were allocated differently? Why should one country be carrying the boatload of it? And then it starts to potentially change the economics of the of the company. So I think that there are options. It's just some people may not like them, because maybe they'll have a little less profit perfectly. But if you can frame it in that you'll still get paid substantially, and that there's a little bit more equity involved, it's speaking to the ethical and the moral value. But this is something that we've been in conversation a lot about when we've been looking at the Don't Sell My DNA legislation. And also we do the Day to Dignity, we do a monthly conversation with Consuli about how do we, if you in all of these things, if you talk to pretty much any individual, or especially or including any legislator, and it doesn't matter what side of the aisle they're on, they all agree that they recognize the importance of the ethical and moral components to this. However, it appears that they struggle to take that and then implement it into legislation. So I think that we're also getting into really looking at how do we reframe legislation, or how do we shift legislation so that it's it reflects these ethical values. I was speaking with someone, what is his name? John, I've forgotten his last name, but he was one of the key people in getting B Corps integrated into as part of California, is it tax code or tax law? I'm not a lawyer, so I don't want to, but getting B Corps, which basically recognize the balance between profit and do good in the world. And one of the things he said to me was, look, I'm not sure what it is, but people come into work and they hang up their coat, their umbrella, and their morals at the door. And we need to be bringing those things back into the boardroom. because we all have them. And
It's
yeah.
we were talking about regenerative medicine, but a nice phrase to look at it is also no regenerative economy. These things all do tie together. How healthcare is connected to our health, our well-being, our economics does play a role. So I think there is actually an argument to be made that we should be looking at a regenerative economy.
I think that the part of this conversation, which I sort of appreciate when you, Lisa, were talking in the last 5-10 minutes about, how this can be approached differently. I think there's one aspect from which is education, since I'm going to play the technocrat and the hardcore medical doctor. But the other thing which also kind of jump on me is how civil we can have this conversation, because I can hear when you're saying or I'm talking, the people will start doing a lot of adjectives, and that's very popular these days, and sort of like box the discussion. So I think one of the problem is that sometimes you can't have a discussion because you're being called the names, and that sort of stifle the stuff immediately. And bringing, I think, the civility back to the conversation is important, in the terms of coming to, coming to do something and putting your molars on the on the hook. I have to say that I have a couple times faced a situation, one of my philosophy when I work is like what patient wants, I need to kind of respect. And a couple of times patient request stuff that I felt emotionally uncomfortable with. And, I have to sort of quote unquote live it with it. I thought, it's a sort of like either I fall on the sword or I do something which I don't do. And I think, maybe that's what we also don't do very well by saying, you can, how do you learn with all those uncomfortable choices, or how you navigate that? Because at the end of the day, I think organically what I'm hearing from you really resonate in my heart. It kind of makes sense in a lot of ways. But then there is those, I think, those kind of barrier disruptors on the stuff like that. Names, heated discussion, ethics is not that important. But at the end of the day, we sort of work on the same earth, and we're looking at, there's so much disparities.
Well, I think it gets back to this bigger question of what do we owe each other, not just even as humans, but to the earth and to the planet. And I would argue one of the things we owe each other is civil discourse, to not be to not be insulting one another,
Yeah.
to not
No,
be, because otherwise, how do you get anything done? You get stuck in a rut.
no, I think in that case, the people who calls the names and is the loudest one finally kind of quote unquote win, because the people just walk away. But I also have a question about this, your struggles with this 23andMe sort of legal action. Are you guys trying to maybe do a book about this? Because I think it would be fascinating to look at this. Right, this is like a good story which has so many branches to it that would make a great read. And it's like, it's not a 23andMe, and not a lot of people. You have one of the female entrepreneur who is great, and then there is this kind of like turnaround, and then the company falls apart. It makes a really good story on so
We
many
need
levels.
Walter Isaacson to write it up.
Yeah, well, it's interesting you say that, because Elizabeth Dreiser and I were the folks who were on the ground, and every now and then, as we were walking through one court to the racing to, like, because we Caveat is one of the folks involved in all of this.
One of the parties. Wow.
Yeah, the parties. I don't want to get too deep into that piece of it, but every now and then Elizabeth would look at me and she's like, this is a movie. There's going to be a movie made of this, because it's so interesting. And there's something else I want to add to this piece of the conversation, which is in the 23andMe bankruptcy hearing, they had a court-appointed ombudsman. And the ombudsman wrote a 211-page report by, the ombudsman's name was Neil Richards. And this was one of the most thoughtful, significant documents around the concept of consent and ethics in a matter such as this. And we were really hoping that would be sort of putting an end and really changing how this all would be handled. But because of being in bankruptcy court, the bankruptcy court only has they have limited parameters. And so ultimately the judge made a decision saying, I read the ombudsman's report, but it's not, we're going to still proceed anyhow. And that was really, it was a moment, because it also raises the point when we talk about equity, about if you have somebody who's going to take the time to write a 211 well-documented page report that basically gets ignored, what is the point of it? And so there was a Harvard Review, the Harvard Review article, which actually speaks about the role of the consumer ombudsman, and basically that it's almost performative rather than valid its way.
Right. That's a good way to put it. Yeah.
And it does raise questions about how the system is working or not, and what kind of changes need to be brought into it. So I bring that up because this particular report does lay the foundation and a kind of a roadmap for where we go.
Is this report like public available? Can
Yeah,
this be
I
reviewed?
can absolutely, I can send it to you, and then maybe we can, let's see, I don't know if I don't think I can drop it in the chat, but what I
Because
can,
it would be interesting to talk about. One of the things, again, from the 23andMe was that the sort of issue hit the time in my life when I'm like, okay, I'm thinking about doing this GWAS on myself. And then there was this couple of snippets here and there, and I sort of stopped. And then I was like, okay, the problem is gone. But I think there is not enough awareness. And that's why I also say like book, movie, whatever.
Right.
Because like one thing, there was this great book about this woman who had a company about the nanotechnology. From the one drop, she can do a bunch of the markers.
right.
I think it was on the Netflix. And I think, I look at this and it was fascinating to me how much I learn about it, okay, about the system and whatever. So, the movies, are the maybe popular media, but the people do get digested. And unless you put the stuff in front of them, people won't think, the people will just move. And then, the people who are interested in getting this data, I would imagine whoever wants to get that data, they don't want to have a conversation at the end of the day. I'm curious why the judge decided to do what he decided to do. What is the premise?
Doorway.
What does what does the court thinks, like, what is my role over here? Like, to sell this, to protect this, to bury this? They're like,
I would say to you that he basically chose to not really look at what the ramification of what the material, what the product of the bankrupt business was. And so, it's like, if it's cars or widgets, okay, whatever. But that's not what he chose to do. He chose to really work within the bankruptcy parameters, and he wanted to be sure, his job is to be sure that the
creditors get paid.
And so that's his kind of thing. And he repeatedly, he never really understood that when people consented out, he kept saying, what they can consent out, what's the problem? And we were like saying, no, they can't consent out. And actually, specific to the 23andMe, the data is you can't destroy it because of how it's stored. Literally the technology, I don't know if it was chip, but I'm not a technology expert, but it's indestructible. And so that data is never going away. And in fact, when it was announced the 23andMe bankruptcy, people were saying, delete your account. Well, it took an additional, I think, 2 to 3 steps to actually just say you wanted your bio data to be burned or destroyed, but they can't really destroy it on the technology end. But if you opt out, if you just deleted your account, that's literally all you did. You orphaned your data. And so we were on a rampage. Is that the word? We were really trying to encourage people to say, don't delete, because if you delete, you lost your data. But if you still have it and you have your data, you still have a voice in the discussion. I mean, the skullduggery and mischief was just.
And just to be clear, the judge was looking at this through a very, very strict lens. He was saying, this is what the bankruptcy code says. This is my job, is to make sure the bankruptcy proceeding goes through. And he wasn't really looking at the broader policy issues, and he didn't really feel like it was his job. But that gets to the broader question of, again, what is the purpose of the law? That
Well, I think this is fascinating discussion. I don't think so. We should be left with the opinion there's much we can do about that. I think
oh no,
bringing
no,
these
I
things
think
to
there
the
are things we can
surface.
do. Yeah.
There are people like Lisa or you, Linda, that kind of working on that.
Elizabeth
And,
Dreiser too.
yeah, and we should have Mrs. Dreiser back on actual our conference because she
Nice.
does talk excellent piece about this. Um, Thank you for bringing awareness to us. Thank you for a very good conference. Is there any sort of any question from our students? I'm going to give them opportunity right now.
Thank you for coming, by the way.
Yep. All right. And if there's no question, then I guess tomorrow we'll have a next session. It's going to be.
If I could just kind of conclude this
Mhm.
event, as I often tell my students,
Okay.
that you've heard people say the moral arc of the universe is long, and from where I can see it bends towards justice, which is quoting Martin Luther King, who's quoting somebody else. But I think the corollary to that is it doesn't bend by itself. Things do not become automatically just uh, by themselves. You got to lean on that arc. You got to keep fighting for justice.
That's a very good ending. That's actually empower the people. And I'm really glad that you actually interject because this actually makes this meeting in the much better place. Thank you very much, everybody. I'm going to see you guys tomorrow for the third day. Have a
Thank you. Lisa, we'll see you on Thursday, right?
Yes. Look forward to seeing everyone then. Thank
All
you.
right.